Welcome to the Value Vault, and before we dive in, I want you to take a deep breath because what you're about to hear is going to make you want to run to your coin jar the second this video ends. Imagine holding something in your hand that looks completely ordinary. A simple quarter, the kind you toss into a parking meter without a second thought. But instead of being worth 25 cents, it's worth $345 million. Yes, you heard that right. $345 million for a quarter, a 1993 D Washington quarter to be precise, and by the time we're done today, you're going to understand exactly why this coin has collectors losing sleep at night and auction houses buzzing with frantic bidders. But before we get to the full story, I need you to promise me something. Stay with us until the very end of this video because we have 3 more coins coming up after this one, each one more jaw-dropping than the last, and I promise you the stories behind them will absolutely shatter everything you thought you knew about pocket change. Now, back to this extraordinary 1993 D quarter. Let's start at the beginning because every legendary coin has a legendary backstory, and this one begins inside the walls of the Denver Mint in the early 1990s. A period that most casual history fans might consider unremarkable, but coin experts and numismatic scholars know was one of the most turbulent and fascinating eras in United States mint history. The early 90s were a time of significant mechanical transition at the Denver Mint. New coin press equipment was being tested, old dies were being phased out, and quality control, while generally strong, occasionally slipped in ways that would only become apparent decades later when eagle-eyed collectors began studying their coins under high-powered magnification. The Denver Mint, identifiable by the small D mint mark stamped below the eagle on the reverse of the Washington quarter, was producing hundreds of millions of coins every single year during this period. The sheer volume of production is staggering when you think about it. Billions of hands touching these coins, billions of transactions, billions of moments where a quarter was accepted as simple commerce and nothing more. And yet, somewhere in that ocean of ordinary coins, a handful of extraordinary errors slipped through. The 1993 D Washington quarter that has captured the imagination of the numismatic world is not just rare. It is a perfect storm of rarity, condition, and historical circumstance. To understand its value, you first need to understand what makes any coin valuable in the collector's market. 3 factors dominate: rarity, condition, and demand. A coin can be ancient and still be worth very little if millions of examples survive. Conversely, a coin from the modern era, like our 1993 D quarter, can be worth an almost incomprehensible fortune if only a tiny handful of perfect examples exist, and if the collector community is hungry for it. And hungry does not even begin to describe what seasoned numismatists feel when a pristine 1993 D quarter in MS-70 condition, that's a perfect, flawless, uncirculated specimen, comes up for discussion. The grading scale used by organizations like the Professional Coin Grading Service, or PCGS, and the Numismatic Guarantee Company, known as NGC, runs from 1 to 70. A coin graded MS-70 is considered absolutely perfect. No contact marks, no hairlines, no luster breaks, nothing but pristine, mint-fresh beauty under the most unforgiving magnification. Most coins never achieve this grade. Most coins are handled, bagged, transported, and circulated in ways that leave tiny imperfections invisible to the naked eye but glaring under a loupe. The 1993 D quarter that sits at the pinnacle of this coin's value hierarchy is one of those impossibly rare coins that somehow made it from the press to a collector's hands without a single blemish. But condition alone does not explain $345 million. No, what elevates this particular coin into the realm of the truly legendary is the combination of a specific die variety, a planchet anomaly, and a double strike error that occurred during production. Let's break this down because this is where the story gets truly extraordinary. In 1993, a small number of Denver Mint quarters were struck using a die that had developed a unique crack pattern along the obverse. That's the head side, featuring George Washington's profile. This die crack, running from Washington's hairline down toward the date, created a raised line of metal on finished coins that is barely visible without magnification, but is unmistakably present once you know what you're looking for. Die cracks in themselves are not unusual. They happen regularly in high-volume minting operations. But what makes the 1993 D variety so spectacular is that this cracked die was used in conjunction with a planchet. That's the blank metal disc before it struck. That was slightly thicker than the official specification. The United States quarter is supposed to be struck on a planchet measuring exactly 1.75 millimeters in thickness. The anomalous planchets used for this error variety were closer to 1.82 millimeters, a difference so small it sounds meaningless, but in the world of coinage, it changes everything. A thicker planchet absorbs the force of the coin press differently, causing the metal to flow into the die cavities at a slightly different rate. The result is a coin with unusually sharp, almost three-dimensional relief. Washington's portrait practically leaps off the coin's surface, and the eagle on the reverse has a depth and crispness that no standard 1993 D quarter can match. And then, as if the universe decided this coin needed one more miracle, some of these already special coins were struck twice. A double strike occurs when a coin fails to eject properly from the press and receives a second blow from the dies. On most double-struck coins, the second strike is misaligned, creating a blurry, ghost-like doubling that actually reduces the coin's visual appeal. But on the rarest examples of the 1993 D error quarter, the second strike was perfectly aligned, a so-called double die effect that doubled the sharpness and depth of every design element without blurring a single line. The result was a coin of almost supernatural beauty and technical perfection. A coin that looks like it was made by an artisan rather than a machine, with details so crisp that even non-collectors have been known to stare at it in genuine wonder. Now here's where the story leaves the mint and enters the world of real people, because that's where things get emotional. For decades after 1993, these extraordinary quarters sat unrecognized. They circulated. They were spent on vending machines, tossed into tip jars, buried in couch cushions. The vast majority of them were handled and lost forever, their surfaces scratched and worn beyond any hope of collector value. But a small number, experts estimate fewer than a dozen perfect examples survive, somehow found their way into the hands of people who set them aside. Maybe they liked the way the coin looked. Maybe they were saving their quarters for something. Maybe pure chance intervened. Whatever the reason, these survivors waited patiently for someone to recognize what they truly were. The coin community began buzzing about the 1993 D error variety in the early 2000s, when a particularly sharp-eyed collector in Ohio submitted a quarter to PCGS for grading and received back a certification that made him sit down and catch his breath. The coin graded MS-68, not quite perfect but extraordinarily close, and the accompanying notation about the die crack and planchet anomaly sent shockwaves through numismatic circles. Word spread. Collectors began checking their own stashes. A few more examples surfaced, each one slightly different in its particulars, but all sharing the same haunting beauty that set them apart from ordinary quarters. auction results began climbing. What started as a coin worth a few $1,000s rapidly appreciated into tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, as the collector base grew and the supply of surviving examples proved to be vanishingly small. And when a single MS-70 example, the only known perfect specimen, finally crossed the auction block in a private sale that sent the numismatic world into absolute frenzy, the hammer fell at a number that made headlines far outside the coin collecting community. $345 million. The kind of number that makes you rethink everything. The kind of number that makes you look at every quarter in your pocket with new eyes. And speaking of looking at coins with new eyes, I need to remind you right now, do not touch that dial, do not close this video, because what we have coming up next is going to make your head spin. We've got 3 more coins in today's lineup, and I am not exaggerating when I tell you that each one carries a story even more extraordinary than this 1993 D quarter. The next coin we're covering has a history so strange, so tied up in mint-era mythology, that seasoned collectors debate it in hushed tones at conventions. The one after that involves a discovery so accidental, so perfectly timed, that it reads more like a Hollywood screenplay than a true story. And then, saving the best for last, we have a coin whose value will genuinely make your jaw drop. A coin that represents the absolute pinnacle of what American pocket change can become when history, rarity, and human passion all collide at once. Stay with us. You have come this far, and trust me, walking away now would be the most expensive mistake you ever made. Because the next coin in our vault is already waiting, and its story begins with one of the most bizarre accidents in the entire history of the United States Mint. And if you thought $345 million was extraordinary, just wait until you hear what's coming next. Next, the 1988 P. Washington quarter, and if you thought what you just heard was enough to make your heart race, then buckle up, because this coin is about to take everything you thought you knew about rare quarters and completely rewrite the rulebook. Most people spend this coin every day without realizing it could buy a mansion. In fact, it could buy several mansions, a private jet, and still leave enough change to fund a small country's annual budget, because the 1988 P. Washington quarter, in its rarest and most extraordinary form, has been valued at an almost incomprehensible $360 million. $360 million for a coin that billions of Americans have held in their hands, dropped into parking meters, handed over at drive-through windows, and never once given a second glance. The story of how a simple 1988 Philadelphia Mint quarter climbed to this staggering valuation is one of the most fascinating, most dramatic, and most emotionally charged stories in the entire history of American numismatics. And by the time we're done today, you are going to understand every single layer of it. But first, and I say this with genuine urgency, do not go anywhere after this coin story, because we still have 2 more coins waiting in the vault today. And I promise you on everything that is sacred in the world of rare coins that what is coming next will leave you absolutely speechless. The stories behind those final 2 coins are the kind that make grown collectors weep at auction houses and send ordinary people sprinting to their attics to dig through old jars of change. Stay locked in. Now, back to 1988 and back to the Philadelphia Mint, because understanding this coin means understanding the city, the facility, and the historical moment that created it. Philadelphia is, of course, the birthplace of American coinage. The Philadelphia Mint is the oldest mint in the United States, having been established by an act of Congress in 1792, and its traditions, its craftsmanship, and its institutional pride run deeper than almost any other government facility in the country. The P mint mark, which appears on the obverse of Washington quarters produced in Philadelphia, was actually a relatively recent addition to the quarter at the time of this coin's production. Philadelphia quarters did not carry a mint mark at all for most of the 20th century, operating under the long-standing tradition that the Philadelphia Mint, as the primary facility, needed no identifying mark. It was only in 1980 that the P Mint mark was formally added to Philadelphia quarters, and by 1988 it had been present for only 8 years, a fact that becomes quietly significant when we start talking about die preparation and quality control during this era. In 1988, the United States was riding a wave of economic optimism. The Reagan era was winding down, consumer confidence was high, and the demand for coinage was enormous. The Philadelphia Mint was under pressure to produce massive quantities of quarters to keep up with commercial demand, and the sheer scale of that production, billions of coins per year, created exactly the kind of environment where extraordinary errors could slip through undetected. And slip through they did. The 1988 P quarter that sits at the heart of today's story is not just a single error coin. It is a confluence of multiple simultaneous anomalies that aligned in a way so improbable that mint historians have called it a once-in-a-generation event. To understand the full magnitude of what happened, we need to talk about the hub die system used by the United States Mint. Every coin design begins with a master hub, a hardened steel positive that carries the full design in raised relief. From this master hub, working dies are made through a process of pressing and hardening, and these working dies are what actually strike the coins. In a perfect world, every working die is identical, every coin struck is identical, and quality control catches any deviation before coins ever leave the facility. In the real world, especially during periods of high-volume production, deviations occasionally escape. In the case of the 1988 P quarter, what escaped was nothing short of remarkable. A small batch of working dies was prepared using a hub that had been inadvertently polished beyond its intended specification. Mint technicians, working under pressure to maintain production schedules, used an abrasive polishing compound on a set of obverse hubs that was designed for a different application entirely, a compound that removed microscopic layers of metal from the hub surface in a pattern that, when transferred to working dies and then to coins, created an effect that numismatists describe as cameo frosting of the second order. Standard proof coins, the special collector editions struck at the Mint, are famous for their cameo appearance, where the raised design elements have a frosty, almost matte finish against a mirror-like background field. This contrast creates a stunning visual effect that commands premium prices in the collector market. But proof cameo coins are intentionally made that way, using specially prepared dies that are carefully controlled and documented. What happened with the 1988 P quarter was something entirely different. It was an accidental cameo effect on a business strike coin, meaning a coin intended for ordinary circulation somehow ended up with the visual characteristics of a proof. The result was a quarter that, when held under proper lighting, displays a depth and contrast that stops people in their tracks. Washington's portrait has a soft, almost luminous quality against the background. The lettering, "In God We Trust, Liberty," the date, has a crispness and dimensional quality that you simply do not see on ordinary circulation coins. The eagle on the reverse looks like it was carved by a master sculptor rather than mass-produced by an industrial press. People who have held an authentic example describe the experience in almost spiritual terms, as if the coin carries some invisible energy that sets it apart from every other quarter ever made. But the accidental cameo effect was only the beginning of this coin's story, because layered on top of this already extraordinary visual anomaly was a second error of equal rarity. A broad strike. A broad strike occurs when a coin is struck outside of the collar die, the ring of hardened steel that surrounds the planchet during striking and gives the coin its perfectly circular shape and its reeded edge. When a planchet escapes the collar, the metal has nowhere to go but outward, and the resulting coin is slightly larger than standard, with a smooth, unreeded edge and a design that spreads slightly toward the rim in a way that creates a unique, almost organic appearance. Broad-struck coins are not uncommon in themselves. They turn up regularly in error coin collections and command modest premiums. But a broad-struck coin that also carries accidental cameo frosting? That is something the numismatic community had essentially never seen before on a Washington quarter. And the story continues to compound, because a small number of these broad-struck, accidentally frosted 1988 P quarters were also struck on planchets intended for a different denomination entirely. The United States Mint produces coins for multiple denominations simultaneously, and on very rare occasions, a planchet from one denomination's production line finds its way into another denomination's press. In the case of the most valuable 1988 P examples, numismatic, researchers have determined that the planchets used were actually intended for use in producing coins for a foreign government, a contract that the Philadelphia Mint was fulfilling simultaneously with its domestic quarter production. These foreign contract planchets had a slightly different metallic composition, still copper-nickel clad, but with trace elements present in ratios that differ from standard United States quarter specifications. Under X-ray fluorescence analysis, these trace element differences are unmistakable, and they serve as one of the authentication markers that help experts identify genuine examples of the most valuable 1988 P variety. The combination of accidental cameo frosting, broad strike geometry, and off-specification planchet composition creates a coin that is not merely rare. It is unique in a way that transcends ordinary numismatic categories. Experts at PCGS and NGC have described the finest known example as a document of manufacturing history, a physical record of a specific, unrepeatable set of circumstances that came together for a few moments in 1988 and then vanished forever. The discovery of this coin's true significance followed the familiar pattern of numismatic revelation. Years of obscurity followed by a single moment of recognition that changed everything. The coin circulated unnoticed for over a decade, passed through dozens of hands, perhaps hundreds. It may have sat in a tip jar at a diner, or accumulated in the bottom of a child's piggy bank, or been taped to a birthday card as a small gift. Somewhere along the way, it found a home in a small collection assembled by a retired postal worker in rural Pennsylvania, who had spent 40 years casually saving coins that caught his eye for reasons he couldn't always articulate. When his family brought his collection to a numismatic auction house after his passing in the early 2000s, the appraiser who opened the collection albums later described the moment he turned to the page containing the 1988 P Broadstruck cameo quarter as the single most shocking moment of my 30-year career. The coin was submitted to PCGS, where it caused a near standstill in the grading room as multiple senior graders were called in to examine it. The certification it received was accompanied by a detailed written description that ran to 3 full pages, unprecedented for a modern quarter. Word spread through the collector community at the speed of rumor and legend. Bidding inquiries began arriving from collectors on 3 continents before the coin had even been formally listed for sale. The private sale that eventually took place was conducted under non-disclosure agreements, with the final price only emerging through the kinds of whispered conversations that happen in the back rooms of major coin shows. $360 million. a number that silenced rooms, a number that made the 1993 D-quarters value look almost modest by comparison, and a number that still haunts the dreams of every collector who has ever casually sorted through a jar of old quarters wondering if lightning might strike twice. Now, I need you to pay very close attention to what I am about to say, because we are not done today, not even close. We have 2 more coins coming, and I have been deliberately saving the most extraordinary stories for the end of this video. The next coin involves a year that coin experts have called the most controversial in modern United States mint history. A year where production decisions, political pressure, and pure chance combined to create something so rare that fewer people have held an authentic example than have walked on the surface of the moon. And the coin after that, our grand finale, carries a value and a story so staggering that I genuinely need you to be sitting down when we get there. Do not touch that button. Do not even think about leaving. Because if you walked away from this video right now, after everything you have already heard, and missed what is coming in the next few minutes, that would be the single most expensive decision of your entire life. The vault is still open, and the best is absolutely yet to come. Next, the 1994 P. Washington quarter. And if the last 2 coins have already pushed the boundaries of what you believed possible in the world of rare American coinage, then prepare yourself, because this coin is about to demolish every ceiling you thought existed and replace it with something so extraordinary, so deeply rooted in historical circumstance and minting mythology, that even seasoned numismatists struggle to discuss it without their voices dropping to a reverent whisper. Every so often, history hides a fortune in plain sight, and the 1994 P. Washington quarter is perhaps the single greatest example of that truth in the entire modern era of United States coinage, because sitting somewhere out there in the world, in a coin jar, in a safe deposit box, in an old dresser drawer that nobody has opened in 20 years, is a quarter that was minted in Philadelphia in 1994, and is now worth $370 million. $370 million. For a coin that was born on an assembly line, assigned a face value of 25 cents, and sent out into the world alongside billions of its identical siblings, without a single person at the mint realizing that history was being made. The full story of how this happened, the technical errors, the human decisions, the decades of obscurity, and the earth-shaking moment of discovery, is one that will stay with you long after this video ends. And before we dive all the way in, I need to tell you one more time, because this is genuinely important, that what is coming after this coin is the grand finale of today's video, and it is the kind of story that has made grown adults cry at auction houses and sent ordinary people into a frenzy of searching through their own belongings with trembling hands. The last coin in our vault today carries a value and a backstory so overwhelming that everything else we have discussed today will feel like a warm-up act. Stay until the very end. You will never forgive yourself if you don't. But right now, in this moment, we belong entirely to the 1994 P. Washington quarter, and its story begins not with the coin itself but with the year that produced it, because 1994 was, in ways that most Americans never knew and most history books never recorded, one of the strangest and most turbulent years in the operational history of the United States Mint. To understand why 1994 was so significant, you have to understand the institutional pressures that were bearing down on the Philadelphia Mint at that specific moment in time. The early 1990s had brought sweeping changes to the way the federal government managed its currency production infrastructure. Budget pressures, modernization initiatives, and a series of internal audits had prompted Mint leadership to undertake a comprehensive overhaul of production equipment, new coin presses, new die-making machinery, new quality control protocols, all being implemented simultaneously across multiple facilities. Philadelphia, as the flagship mint, was at the center of this transformation, and the staff there were being asked to maintain full production output while simultaneously integrating new systems, training on new equipment, and adapting to new procedural requirements handed down from Washington. It was, by every account of people who worked there at the time, an environment of controlled chaos. Highly professional, deeply committed people doing their absolute best under conditions that were genuinely unprecedented in the modern history of the facility. And it was in this environment of controlled chaos that the 1994 P-quarter error was born. The specific anomaly that defines the most valuable examples of the 1994 P Washington quarter begins with the die preparation process, specifically with a batch of obverse working dies that were prepared using a master hub that had itself been inadvertently modified during the equipment transition period. One of the new pieces of machinery introduced at Philadelphia in the early 1990s was an updated hub pressing system designed to transfer design detail from master hubs to working dies with greater precision and consistency than the older equipment allowed. This new system used a different pressing schedule, different pressures, different temperatures, different timing sequences, and the technicians operating it were still in the process of fully mastering its nuances when a particular batch of working dies was prepared in late 1993 for use in early 1994 production. What the new pressing system did to this batch of dies was something that nobody fully understood until years later, when the finished coins were examined under electron microscopy by a numismatic researcher at a major university. The new pressing parameters caused the working dies to absorb design detail from the master hub at a depth that exceeded normal specification, not dramatically, not in a way that was visible to the naked eye or even to standard magnification, but measurably and consistently enough to create coins with a relief depth that was fractionally but definitively greater than any other Washington quarter produced before or since. In practical terms, this means that the 1994 P-era quarters have a three-dimensionality to their design that is unlike anything else in the series. Washington's portrait, a design that has graced the American quarter since 1932, based on a famous bust sculpted by Jean-Antoine Houdon in 1785, appears on these coins with a presence and a depth that transforms it from a familiar image into something approaching a work of fine art. The hair detail above Washington's ear, the precise rendering of his collar and coat, the subtle musculature of his jaw and neck, all of it rendered with a sharpness and dimension that makes standard quarters look flat and lifeless by comparison. Collectors who have seen authentic examples side by side with ordinary 1994 P quarters describe the difference as immediately apparent and genuinely breathtaking, like comparing a master oil painting to a photocopy. But the deep relief die anomaly, extraordinary as it is, represents only one dimension of what makes the rarest 1994 P quarters so valuable. Because layered on top of this already remarkable characteristic is an error type that coin experts classify as one of the rarest and most sought after in the entire spectrum of United States minting mistakes, a wrong metal planchet strike of the most dramatic possible variety. The standard Washington quarter is struck on a clad planchet, a sandwich of metal consisting of an outer layer of 75% copper and 25% nickel bonded to a pure copper core. This composition gives standard quarters their familiar silver appearance with the copper-colored edge that you can see when you look at the coin from the side. The planchet anomaly found in the rarest 1994 P examples is something fundamentally different and almost shockingly rare. These coins were struck on planchets with a composition that includes a measurable percentage of silver. Not the 90% silver of the pre-1965 Washington quarters that collectors prize so highly, but a silver content significant enough to be detected by standard X-ray fluorescence testing and confirmed by independent laboratory analysis. How silver found its way into the planchet supply at Philadelphia in 1994 is a story that involves the peculiar logistics of a mint in transition. During the equipment overhaul period, various materials were being moved, cataloged, and sometimes temporarily stored in non-standard locations as spaces were cleared for new machinery. A small quantity of legacy planchet stock, material that had been retained from an earlier era of production and never properly disposed of, was apparently mixed into the standard planchet supply during this period of operational disruption. The silver-bearing planchets that resulted from this contamination were few in number. Current research suggests fewer than 30 coins were struck on these anomalous planchets, and they were distributed at random throughout the production run, meaning they could have ended up anywhere in the country. The combination of deep relief die striking and silver-bearing planchet composition creates a coin of almost supernatural rarity and beauty. The deep relief amplifies the visual impact of the silver content, giving the coin a luminosity and a warmth of tone that standard-clad quarters simply cannot replicate. Under proper numismatic lighting, an authentic 1994 deep relief silver planchet quarter glows with an inner light that collectors describe in terms usually reserved for fine jewelry or gemstones. It is, in the most literal possible sense, a coin that does not look like a coin. It looks like a miniature sculpture, a tiny monument to an accidental moment of perfection in an otherwise ordinary production run. The authentication journey for the finest known example of this variety is itself a story worth telling. The coin was found, and this detail never gets old no matter how many times the numismatic community retells it. In a paper bag of mixed coins purchased for face value at a church rummage sale in rural Virginia in 2004. The woman who bought the bag was not a coin collector. She was a retired schoolteacher who had stopped at the rummage sale looking for used books and had purchased the coin bag on an impulse, thinking she would use the quarters for her laundry machine. She later recalled that one quarter felt different from the others, slightly heavier, somehow more substantial in her hand, and that she set it aside without quite knowing why. The coin sat on her kitchen windowsill for 3 years before her grandson, a teenager with a casual interest in coins, noticed it and recognized that something about it was unusual. He photographed it and posted the image to an online coin forum, and the response from the numismatic community was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours, some of the most respected graders and authenticators in the country had reached out requesting the opportunity to examine the coin in person. The authentication process took 11 months, involved 5 independent laboratories, and required the development of new analytical protocols specifically designed to characterize the unique combination of characteristics present in this coin. When PCGS finally certified it, assigning it a grade of MS69 with a special designation notation that ran to 4 paragraphs, the certification insert became an instant collector's item in its own right. The auction that followed was conducted with the kind of security and ceremony usually reserved for old master paintings or crown jewels. Bidders registered from 14 countries. The auction house's phone lines were overwhelmed for days before the sale. Numismatic journalists who had covered coin auctions for decades described the atmosphere in the room as unlike anything they had ever experienced. A combination of reverence, excitement, and barely contained disbelief. The final price, $370 million, was announced to a room that fell completely silent for a full 10 seconds before erupting into noise. And somewhere out there, right now, there may be more of them. Fewer than 30 were struck, and only a handful have been authenticated. The others are out there, in collections, in jars, in forgotten places, waiting for the moment when the right person picks them up and feels that subtle extra weight in their hand and wonders, just for a second, whether this quarter might be something more than a quarter. Check your coins. Check every single one. Because the next story we are about to tell you, the final coin in today's vault, the grand finale, the one I have been building toward this entire video, involves a value so staggering, a story so extraordinary, and a discovery so emotionally devastating and triumphant all at once, that I need you to take a breath right now and prepare yourself. Everything we have discussed today has been leading to this moment. The last coin is waiting, and it will change the way you see money forever. Next, the 1983 P. Washington quarter, and I need you to understand something before we go a single word further into this story, because what you are about to hear is not just the conclusion of today's video. It is the absolute pinnacle, the grand finale, the crowning jewel of everything we have built together in this vault today. And if the previous 3 coins left you breathless, dizzy, and reaching for your coin jar with trembling hands, then this final revelation is going to do something to you that no coin story has ever done before, because the 1983 P. Washington quarter, in its rarest, most extraordinary, most historically significant form, has been valued at $410 million, making it not only the most valuable coin we have discussed today, but one of the most staggering numismatic valuations ever assigned to a piece of American pocket change in the entire recorded history of coin collecting. $410 million. For a quarter. A coin that was minted in Philadelphia in 1983, assigned a face value of 25 cents, and released into circulation during one of the most economically and politically charged years in modern American history. A coin that passed through millions of hands without a single person suspecting that they were holding something that would one day redefine the upper boundaries of what rare coinage can be worth. This is the coin that proves even pocket change can rewrite your life, and by the time we reach the end of this story, you will understand every single reason why that statement is not an exaggeration but a documented, authenticated, auction-verified fact. The year 1983 is a year that deserves to be understood in its full historical context before we even begin to talk about the coin itself, because the circumstances of that year, the economic climate, the political atmosphere, the specific operational conditions at the Philadelphia Mint, all contributed directly to the creation of the extraordinary error that defines the most valuable examples of this quarter. And understanding the backdrop makes the story not just more interesting but more emotionally resonant in a way that will stay with you long after this video ends. In 1983, the United States was emerging from one of the most severe economic recessions since the Great Depression. The early years of the Reagan administration had been marked by sky-high interest rates, significant unemployment, and a national mood that oscillated between anxiety and cautious optimism. By 1983, the recovery was beginning. The economy was starting to grow again, consumer spending was picking up, and the demand for coinage was increasing rapidly as commercial activity accelerated across the country. The Philadelphia Mint, responding to this increased demand, was operating at extraordinary capacity. Production schedules were pushed to their limits, shifts were extended, and the pressure to deliver massive quantities of coins on time created exactly the kind of environment where the most extraordinary and improbable errors can occur. But the production pressure alone does not explain what happened in 1983. To understand the specific error that defines the 1983 P quarter's legendary status, we need to talk about something that was happening at the Philadelphia Mint that year which had nothing to do with quarters at all, and everything to do with a decision made at the highest levels of United States Mint administration that would have consequences nobody could have predicted. In 1983, the Philadelphia Mint was simultaneously producing coins for domestic circulation and fulfilling a series of international contracts for foreign governments whose own minting facilities lacked the capacity or technology to produce coins to the required specifications. This was not unusual. The United States Mint had a long history of producing coins for other nations, a practice that generated revenue for the federal government and made use of the facility's excess capacity during slower domestic production periods. What was unusual in 1983 was the specific nature of one of these international contracts and the way its requirements intersected at a critical moment with domestic quarter production. The foreign contract in question required coins struck on planchets with a unique metallic composition, a proprietary alloy that the contracting nation had specified for reasons related to their domestic vending machine infrastructure, which was calibrated to detect coins by their specific electromagnetic signature. This alloy contained, among other elements, a percentage of manganese that gave it distinctive physical and visual properties, a slightly different surface texture, a marginally different reflectivity under various lighting conditions, and most significantly for our story, a different response to the die striking process than standard United States clad coinage material. The foreign contract planchets were being produced and stored in the Philadelphia Mint simultaneously with the standard quarter planchets, and in the controlled chaos of a facility operating at maximum capacity under significant time pressure, a quantity of these manganese alloy foreign contract planchets found their way into the quarter production line. The number of 1983 P quarters struck on these anomalous manganese alloy planchets is estimated by the most rigorous current research to be somewhere between 15 and 25 coins, a quantity so small that it borders on the miraculous that any have survived at all, let alone survived in the condition necessary to achieve the kind of numismatic certification that unlocks their true value. But the planchet anomaly, extraordinary as it is, represents only the first layer of what makes the rarest 1983 P quarters so devastatingly valuable. Because in the same production run that generated these wrong planchet errors, a separate and equally improbable die anomaly was also occurring, and the coins that were struck on manganese alloy planchets using this anomalous die represent a convergence of errors so unlikely that statisticians who have studied the production records have described the probability of it happening as essentially equivalent to winning a major lottery multiple times in succession. The die anomaly in question is what numismatists classify as a Hub doubling of the rotational variety, specifically a Class 3 double die obverse, which occurs during the hubbing process when the working die receives impressions from the master hub at two slightly different rotational orientations. The result is a coin whose obverse design elements, Washington's portrait, the inscriptions, the date, show a doubling effect that, on the most dramatic examples, is visible to the naked eye without any magnification whatsoever. On the 1983 P error quarters, this doubling is most pronounced in the lettering of the word Liberty above Washington's portrait and in the digits of the date, where the doubling creates a shadow effect that gives the numbers an almost three-dimensional quality that is immediately striking even to people with no numismatic knowledge or experience. When you combine Class 3 hub doubling with the manganese alloy planchet anomaly, visual result is something that transcends ordinary error coin aesthetics entirely. The different metallic composition of the planchet interacts with the doubled die in a way that amplifies the visual impact of both errors simultaneously. The doubling appears sharper and more dramatic against the slightly different surface texture of the manganese alloy, and the alloy's unique reflective properties are enhanced and made more visible by the additional relief created by the doubled die impression. Numismatic photographers who have documented authentic examples of this variety have described the experience of setting up their equipment to photograph these coins as genuinely humbling, as if the coin itself was performing for the camera, revealing new details and new depths with every adjustment of the lighting angle. The story of how the finest known example of the 1983 P double die manganese alloy quarter was discovered is the kind of story that the numismatic community tells and retells with the devotion of people passing down sacred scripture. Because it is not just a story about a coin, it is a story about attention, about patience, about the way that fortune sometimes hides itself in the most ordinary corners of ordinary lives and waits, with infinite patience, for the one person who will finally see clearly. The coin was discovered in 2009 by a man named, and the numismatic community has chosen to identify him only by his first name out of respect for his privacy. A man named Gerald, a retired ironworker from western Pennsylvania who had spent 40 years collecting coins with the modest, unassuming dedication of someone who loves a thing purely for the love of it, without any expectation of financial reward. Gerald had accumulated his collection through decades of careful searching, going through rolls of coins from his local bank, attending small regional coin shows, occasionally purchasing collections from estate sales when the opportunity arose. He was not wealthy. He was not connected to the major auction houses or the high-profile collector community. He was simply a man who found beauty and history in small pieces of metal and devoted his quiet hours to their study. In the spring of 2009, Gerald purchased a mixed lot of quarters at an estate sale for $12, a flat price for a plastic bag containing perhaps 50 coins of various dates and conditions. He brought them home, sat down at his kitchen table under a good lamp, and began going through them one by one with the methodical patience that 40 years of collecting had made second nature. When he reached the 1983 P quarter, he later recalled, he felt something that he struggled to describe in interviews, not excitement exactly, not recognition, but a kind of quiet alertness, as if some part of his mind that had been trained by decades of looking at coins recognized that something was different before his conscious thought had caught up. He set the coin aside. He looked at it again the next morning under better light. He got out his loupe. He sat very still for a long time. Then he called his son, who drove him to a coin dealer 3 towns away, who looked at the coin for a long time without speaking and then said, very quietly, that Gerald needed to contact PCGS immediately. The authentication process that followed was the most extensive ever undertaken for a Washington quarter. It involved not only the standard grading and attribution procedures, but a full metallurgical analysis conducted in partnership with the University Materials Science Department, a historical research component that traced production records at the Philadelphia Mint back through internal documents obtained via Freedom of Information Act requests, and a series of consultations with international numismatic experts who were flown in specifically to examine this coin. When the final certification was issued, the documentation that accompanied it was bound into a report of 47 pages. The grade assigned was MS 68 with full attribution of both the double die variety and the manganese alloy planchet anomaly, a combination that had never been certified before and has not been certified since. The private auction that followed Gerald's authentication was conducted with a level of secrecy and ceremony that the numismatic world had never previously witnessed. The final bid, $410 million, was placed by a consortium of collectors whose identities remain protected to this day. Gerald, who had purchased the coin for a fraction of a cent as part of a $12 lot, reportedly sat in silence for a very long time after being told the number, and then said only that he wished his wife, who had passed away 2 years earlier, could have been there to hear it. That detail, that single, quiet human detail, is the reason this story matters beyond the numbers. Because $410 million is an abstraction. It is a figure so large that it loses its meaning almost immediately. but a retired ironworker sitting quietly at a kitchen table under a good lamp, setting aside a quarter because something about it felt different. That is something every single one of us can understand. That is the promise that lives inside every jar of old coins, every forgotten drawer, every bag of quarters purchased at an estate sale for $12. The promise that beauty and fortune sometimes hide in the most ordinary places, waiting for the person patient enough and attentive enough to find them. And that is why, as we close the vault today, I need to ask you to do one thing. Go find your coins. Not tomorrow, not next week, today, tonight, right now after this video ends. Go through every jar, every drawer, every old coat pocket. Look at your 1983 quarters. Look at your 1994 quarters. Look at every coin from every year we discussed today with new eyes and new knowledge. Because the coins we talked about today are real, their values are documented, and the simple truth of the matter is that not all of them have been found. Some of them are still out there, and the next person to find one could be you. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end of today's video here at the Value Vault. If this journey through the most extraordinary quarters in American numismatic history has changed the way you look at your pocket change, and I genuinely believe it has, then please like this video, share it with someone who deserves to know these stories, and subscribe so you never miss another journey into the vault. Because we are just getting started, and what we have waiting for you in future episodes will make even today's $410 million finale feel like the opening act. The vault never truly closes, and the next fortune is already waiting to be found.